Welcome back to Inside the Box. I'm Joanna Lee, and in the final episode of Behind the Scenes series, our next guest is a huge advocate for social justice, especially in feminism, queer, post decolonial, and anti oppression and mental health. Currently, she is a human rights, employment, labor, privacy, and administrative lawyer. She specializes in assisting individuals who have experienced discrimination on the basis of sex, gender, sexuality, and race. Her work is also strongly centered on the advancement of workers' rights. Please welcome the amazing Jadine Lannon. Welcome, Jay. Thank you so much for joining us. It is so wonderful to have you here.
It's really wonderful to be here. I'm very excited to speak to you today, Joanna.
Absolutely. So, I wanted to begin with your origin story. What was the journey towards becoming the person you are today?
All right, let's try to keep it. I'll try to be as brief as I can. I'm originally from British Columbia. I grew up in what I think people in Vancouver would call a small town, but in smaller towns it's maybe considered not so small. So I grew up in Penticton, British Columbia, which is kind of right smack in the middle of the province, but down in the south, close to the border. And it's a pretty for for all intents and purposes, it's a pretty homogenous space. We don't have a ton of racial diversity. When I was growing up, we didn't have really any representation of queer diversity. And I was like clearly very queer and very academically inclined, and had that kind of like traditional weirdo kid experience where I was just like always on the outs and didn't really know where I was, where I fit in, and what it all meant. So when I was 18, I knew, 17, 18, basically as soon as I graduated high school, I was like, I'm out of here. I ran away as fast as I possibly could, and I went to Toronto. So that's actually where I did my undergraduate degree and then my law degree straight afterwards, both at the University of Toronto. And it was really the first time. It was the first time that I'd lived in a big city, and I was actually lived in Scarborough, which is not in Toronto. So don't listen to what the University of Toronto tells you about the Scarborough campus. It is not one. I think they called it it's one transit ride away. And in theory it is, because it's all the same transit system, but actually it's two buses, an LRT, and then the subway.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no.
So it was it was a bit of a shock to like get in the taxi from the airport and like be driving down the 401, which is, the big highway, just outside of Toronto, and like watching and like looking at all the buildings downtown and being like, oh my God, I live here now. This is going to be so great. And then watching as they like disappear in the rear view. And I'm like, where are we going? What is this? Like, where are you taking me? Um, yeah, so I ended up in Scarborough for a couple years, which was amazing for me, really, because I'm a white, at that time, very very cis passing person, and I hadn't really been exposed to a lot of racial diversity. And Scarborough um, you know, is a place where a lot of immigrants come and settle. So there's a lot of racial diversity, and it was really the first time I had been exposed to that. And I just thought it was the best thing ever. Like I just loved living amongst people who had really different backgrounds and really different belief systems. And then, you're in the context of a university, so it's kind of this melding together. And the intention, I guess, is, at least as I understood it, is that we would come together with open minds to try to
Of course.
learn from each other. So I ended up having this very rich undergrad experience that was so different from what I had experienced before. Um, so that was a really amazing experience for me. And then I was studying, my undergraduate degree is in international development studies and political science.
Wow.
So yeah, and so I was like very, and I mean, international development studies has a couple of different names, but effectively it's just post-colonial and critical theory studies. So we did like everything in the sciences and the humanities, some hard sciences with like again a really critical eye, and with a focus on international development and basically how the West has screwed everything up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
sure.
just it's like almost every intervention, at least over, if we start looking at development as an industry kind of over the last 100 200 years,
Mhm.
um every intervention it's never just, or if it ever was, it's never, yeah, what am I trying to say? It's never from the good of somebody's heart. The purpose, it's
Yes.
always couched in this language of like, we're going to make better. We're here for humanity, social justice. And like,
Mhm.
it's like that Scooby Doo cartoon where at the end of it, they like pull the mask off somebody and you like pull the mask off of like every international development attempt. And it's like, oh, imperialism is the actual land grabs. Yeah.
If it weren't for those darn kids, we would have gotten away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah, and like really did actually, like,
for sure.
yeah.
For
So like the history of Western development, it's the international development is like 150 years of imperialism and neo imperialism, and so it was amazing to learn about that. But when you learn about that for a number of years and you are living in a Western context and you are, your positionality, the person who you are, your intersecting identities are lining up with
Yeah.
all of the things that you're criticizing, um, it becomes very hard to see a future for yourself in that industry. It just seemed so illegitimate for me after learning about development and all the things that like white Westerners had done to like, I don't know how much I can swear.
We'll keep it to PG.
PG. Okay.
Yes.
So like basically how much white Westerners had done to kind of just mess things up. It didn't make sense for me, the place that I was in my life, to go on into international development. And I have wonderful colleagues
Yeah.
who have done so, who share a similar positionality to me, but it just wasn't working for me. I just couldn't get over that
Mhm.
cognitive hurdle. So the special thing about my undergraduate program is that it had we had a 1 year placement in our fourth year, where we would go work overseas with a development organization. And then we would come back in our fifth year and we'd write a dissertation. And despite doing both of those things, they did not give us a master's degree, but they
What?
should have. I
Wow.
know. Should have
Oh.
immediately been awarded a master's degree, but
Uh,
was not. So I'm very bitter about it.
wow.
Yeah, so I didn't want to go to any traditional development organizations, kind of more traditional spaces, where people were doing development. So I decided to go to India, to work at a legal advocacy organization in South India.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was amazing. I mean, everybody says it's life changing when they go to India, but it is true. It was very life changing for me, because I met is mostly working with lawyers, and people that did legislative advocacy, and it was around technology. So they specialized in internet governance and privacy in particular, and some stuff around technology regulation. Um, so I ended up doing a bunch of work with lawyers, and I had like never met a lawyer before in my life, had no idea what they did. But I met these great young people, who were they were so passionate and they were so smart, and what they were doing seemed tangible. They were actually speaking to policy makers, and they were helping to write legislation,
Mhm.
and things were happening. You could do all this work and they were actually tangible things that were coming out of it. And I thought that was so inspiring. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually make change. So I got back, and over my fifth year I was writing a dissertation, and doing a number of other things, and also just like wildly applying for law school. No idea what I was doing. Like absolutely no idea. Just kind of like spent one entire week just like reading all the things that you have to do to apply for law school, and like just crazily trying to study for the LSAT and not studying sufficiently, and just it was nutso. Um, but kind of on a like somehow I ended up getting accepted into the University of Toronto for law.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great school.
It was a great school. And I was really, I mean, it worked for me because I was already living in Toronto, and my long-term spouse, the person who's become my legal partner, my husband, was living in Toronto. He had immigrated from Egypt, and so he'd never lived anywhere else in Canada, and he wasn't keen on it at the time. So it made sense for us to stay in Toronto. So we moved downtown finally, thank God. Moved away from Scarborough. Love Scarborough. I have nothing bad to say about Scarborough, but it was just like, if you come from small town BC and you come to live in Toronto, you want to live in Toronto. You want to do it. You want to be downtown. So we moved right downtown. And it was really cool. We lived quite close to Queen Street West. And so I thought I was going to have this great downtown Toronto experience. And then I went to law school. And so I never left my house.
Oh, no.
I just like, all I did was study.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like once a semester, I would like crawl out, I mean, like the first month and like see my friends and be like, hi. And then I would go away for another number of months. Yeah. So I ended up going to law school, and knew that I wanted to, I wanted to get this practical toolkit that I could use to affect social change in my home context, in a place that it was more legitimate for me to, walk into a room and say, this is how I think we should be doing things, and I'm open to suggestions, but,
yeah.
So throughout law school, I started at the beginning thinking I would never be a lawyer. I would never practice. This was just a toolkit that I would then, go back and do different types of development in Canada or using, I should say. And then kind of as it went on, I was like, well, I'm paying a lot of money.
Yes,
I should probably do something. I should probably get some harder skills after this, practice what I've actually learned. So I basically sat down and went, well, what is an area of law where social justice is happening, where we're practicing and applying these critical lenses. And I came up with labor and employment law. And I knew I wanted to do human rights law.
Yeah.
So there's kind of labor and employment is a really interesting space because, I mean, everybody works.
Yeah.
For the vast majority of people, everybody works. You have to. And so work is so integral to our everyday lives, even if we're not working. And it's so integral to our society. And so it's never just the area of when you're dealing with somebody's employment issue, it's never just an employment issue. It always overlaps with all of these other spaces in their lives. And then typically there's also other legal overlaps.
Yes.
Yeah. So it tends to be the case that, an individual who's dealing with an employment issue may also be dealing with a human rights issue. So they really parallel each other. So a lot of employment and labor law lawyers also practice human rights law. So it made sense for me. So I ended up cold calling a bunch of firms in Vancouver because by this time I had lived in Toronto, and I was like, all right, that's great. I'm ready to go now. I was like, 8 years is enough.
8 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's enough. I have seen, every time I crawled out of my shell once a semester and went to a club, I was like, this is great. I'm done now. I'm done. So we made the decision to move back to Vancouver, or I should say, to move to Vancouver. Neither of us had ever lived there before. And my spouse and I. And so I started cold calling firms, and I just
Oh,
would
wow.
email them and call them and be like, "Hi, I want to work for you." And so I have no shame. And I ended up getting hired by a really cool boutique union side labor law firm here in Vancouver called Mard Lister. And I did you work in the summers between
Yeah.
your years in law school. So I ended up doing my second year there, which is the year between second year and third year. And then I articled, which is this year that every lawyer in Canada, mostly, this is kind of changing, but like, it's like a residency. Right after you come out of school, you have to do this 1 year of articling. So basically practicing to practice before you get licensed as a full-fledged lawyer. So I articled there, and then I moved over to another boutique firm called Alavato Quayle and Roy, which had a very, very strong social justice bent to it. And up until very recently, I was working there full time. So I worked there for about 3 and a bit years.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
That's quite a while. Yeah. So was it a private firm, or was it like collective, public?
Yeah. So all the firms I've worked at have been private. So it is typically the case that union side firms or employee side firms, the vast majority of their work is done for unions, because unions are institutional clients. They tend to have a fair amount of resources that they can put towards uh, legal advocacy and legal work. So it tends to be the case that the firm will make most of its money off of its union clients,
Yeah.
and then it will, of what's left over of the time, you kind of use that work to fund the more social justice oriented. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I think union work and labor work is very social justice oriented, but you kind of you use the resources that you get through doing that work to potentially, fund pro bono work, or offer low fee services to individual employees who aren't unionized, or people that have human rights issues, or whatever you're interested in.
Hmm.
So all private. My firm, the one that I was just working at, Alavato Quayle and Roy, they predominantly work for public sector unions. So we're a private firm, but we mostly work with public employees, which is cool.
Yeah. Wow. Can you please elaborate on different kinds of cases or matters you have worked on?
Yeah, absolutely. Should warn you that, like, lawyers, we love to talk.
Oh, I love it, because this is what it's all about, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, stop me. I could go on forever. So I practice in three main areas. So, and I'll explain them a little bit, because I mean, there's so many legal terms, and only lawyers know what areas of law there are. Like,
Yes.
everybody else is just like, it's the law, and that's totally fine and normal. And like,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that it's like so difficult to understand what our industry looks like for lay people. But so I practice three areas. I practice in labor law, I practice in employment law, and I practice in human rights law. I practice some other areas of law that are related, but the bread and butter of my practice is labor, employment, and human rights. And so labor law is the law that applies to you if you're a unionized employee or a unionized employer. Employment law is what applies to you broadly, and there's some overlap, but for the purpose of setting them apart right now, labor law is if you're unionized, employment law is if you're non-unionized, and human rights law kind of sits over top of all of that. So it applies to everybody all of the time. So I do, with regards to my union work, I work mostly for CUPE locals. So CUPE is the Canadian Union of Public Employees. It's one of the largest unions in the country. So it's got it's a national union, and then it has a regional branch, and it has all of the locals. And so a local is just a body. It's kind of like was the best to describe it?
Musicians.
Sorry?
Musicians union are locals.
Yeah. So the local is like basically it's like every collection of um it's kind of the on the ground representation of the union. So locals are technically like a CUPE local or a musicians local.
Mhm.
They're all part of the national union or a larger union, but each one functions mostly independently from one another. So it's kind of the local union in your space. So I work for CUPE unionizes a lot of public spaces. And one of the big public spaces that they unionize is municipalities, so municipal workers. So I work with a lot of locals that have unionized municipalities across the Lower Mainland. And in that work, we deal with everything under the sun kind of thing that could happen in employment. So terminations, discipline, human rights issues, privacy issues, kind of like anything that could happen that was not resolved by the employer and the union, kind of informally between them. We assist with those ones, and typically it's taking them to hearing. And so that's a pretty broad practice. With regards to employment law, it tends to be the case that the time people need employment lawyers is when they've been terminated.
Yeah.
Or when they think they've been terminated or they want to be terminated, or it's typically when the employment relationship is coming to an end or has come to an end for some reason or another. So I tend to assist people with dealing with severance packages, negotiating severance packages, understanding what their basic rights are, reviewing contracts to see what they mean at the end of the employment relationship. That tends to be it. I have assisted. One of the parts of my practice that I really like, that this firm Aliveto, Quayle and Roy specializes in, is we assist migrant workers, so temporary foreign workers, with employment matters. And that's a really special and a really necessary area of law, because the Temporary Foreign Workers Program is a national program in Canada that helps foreign workers come over and do what should be quote unquote temporary work here. And it's this big it's this big national program, but there's actually very little regulation of this program. And so it tends to be the case that employees just show up and employers are like, all right, well, here's your new contract, or like, here's what you're going to do, or there's no job for you at all. It ends up being way more informal than it should be.
Yeah.
And, these are very vulnerable workers.
Who
So
don't
they
know
can,
what the customs are of Canada, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And like often they've had to pay thousands of Canadian dollars to get over here, because there's all kinds of like really shady recruitment schemes. And they have to pay for documents, and they have to pay, often they need assistance like dealing with the visa system. And then they may have to pay for their flights up front, which should be at one point, it should be reimbursed by the employer, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So you can imagine if you're if you're someone who's someone we get a lot of people from Latin America who come and work on the farms here in the Lower Mainland, and so they tend to be people that don't have any post-secondary education. So English is already very challenging for them, and they don't have a ton of resources. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to scrape together 2,000 Canadian dollars to get over to the country. And then you show up and you're like, you don't know any of the customs, you don't know any of the laws. Often like the language is very challenging, and you're so vulnerable, right? So you kind of take what's given to you, and you don't know that you're entitled to, kind of basic employment standards, or you don't know that you're entitled to certain things that are in the contract because you can't read the contract, or you don't know the contract applies, right? So they are very frequently taken advantage of. And in particular, I've worked with some clients who were live-in caregivers, so who came over under the temporary foreign workers program and worked as live-in caregivers.
Mhm.
And that can be, either that can be a really safe, really great environment, or it cannot be. And it's very, it, it can be, you're so vulnerable when you're living in somebody else's house in particular, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and like these
Uh,
people, one of the complicated things that happens under, particularly for temporary foreign work, or I should say for live-in caregivers, but also for many groups of temporary foreign workers, is that when they get issued a work visa, they get issued a work visa for the specific employer that's bringing them over.
yeah.
So if the employment relationship falls apart, they actually can't work anywhere else legally.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
a double-edged sword. So what happens to these people when, their contract is terminated or they're fired? Where do you
yeah.
come in?
That's a great question, because often, they've probably been underpaid. Um, and even if they weren't underpaid, like they're getting paid typically, they have to get paid effectively minimum wage, really. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. Um, so they've been, not making a ton of money, and it's often not enough money to get home. And so they can get stuck, and they end up kind of being in this legal limbo where if they don't have family members at home or a community here that can support them until they can get a new employer under the temporary foreign worker program, they're kind of stuck going through that program again and again. um, it's a very precarious situation. So thankfully, in the Lower Mainland, there are a number of organizations that assist temporary foreign workers
Yeah.
throughout, their tenure, their employment tenure, but in particular when the employment relationship comes to an end and now they need services. One in particular is the Migrant Workers Center, which is here in downtown Vancouver. They do legal advocacy work,
Mhm.
and I believe they can also help connect temporary foreign workers to services when they require them. So really want to boost them. They do great work. Um, but yeah, so one of the areas of practices that I really love, that I really value, is working with temporary foreign workers, and particularly living caregivers,
Mm.
who are just, they can be very vulnerable, and taking them through the process of understanding what their rights are, enforcing the contract, potentially bringing a claim against employers or former employers, to try to enforce some of those rights and hold them accountable. It's really important work, but it's also very empowering for the workers,
Absolutely.
who I think sometimes feel for the first time that like Canada is actually a place where the law can be on their side.
That's
Um,
that's
yeah,
great. Yeah.
yeah.
It seems though that this sort of information is not out there. So it's good that you're talking about this. And this channel is also used as that sort of vessel to advise other people as well. So thank you for sure for sharing this. It's important information, especially for foreign workers who even might be international students that are here, on a working visa and intend to go to school afterwards, but don't have enough money to support themselves, or somebody who's gotten out of school with a degree but can't find work because they're still an international student. So
Yeah.
they're also in a very sticky situation, it seems. And yeah, so my other question would be, when would you advise members of the union to seek legal counsel, especially musicians and queer?
That's a great question. I think, my initial answer is, if it's something the union can help you with, I wouldn't advise that you seek external counsel.
Okay.
Um, because the union is there to assist you with those issues. Um, so if you don't know who your local union rep is, find out. You pay union dues,
Yeah.
and that the union is supposed to be assisting you with those issues. And often I find it's when people feel like they haven't gotten sufficient representation from their union, it's often because the union just doesn't know what's going on.
Okay, so the more information they have, and if they cannot resolve it, that's when we seek legal counsel for sure.
Yeah, there are issues that the union can't assist you with. So things like, and I can't say it's not that it's not that they cannot in every situation, but sometimes the scope of what they can help you with is limited pursuant to the collective agreement or what have you. But typically, unions don't assist their members with workers' compensation stuff.
Okay.
So here in BC we call it WorkSafe BC is our workers' compensation body.
Yes.
So for WorkSafe workers' compensation stuff, if you're dealing with that, it's often helpful to talk to a lawyer. And if you are dealing with a human rights issue that you want to advance yourself, your union can assist you with human rights issues if they're related to your workplace.
Yes.
But a trade-off with working with your union is that the union stands in the position of the employee vis-a-vis the employer.
Right, right.
So you're employed by your employer, but in a unionized context, the union is actually the party to the contract. So when you file a grievance, for example, under your collective agreement, the union owns the grievance. It's the union that decides how the grievance goes forward.
Okay.
And so for some grievers, for some members and workers, that can feel very disempowering.
Yeah.
So, the benefit of that is that your union dues pay for that. So you're not paying for legal fees out of pocket, but of course, it can feel very disempowering to not have control over your own grievance or, what you feel is your own grievance. So if you're dealing with a human rights matter and you really feel like you want to have control over the process, you should speak to your own lawyer, and you'd have to deal with it through the Human Rights Tribunal. You wouldn't be able to get your lawyer to help you advance it through the union, but you would be able to get your own counsel to help you advance a separate claim with the tribunal.
Okay, yeah, that sounds very reasonable. Would you say that these include matters outside of work area, or is it just like within the work context?
So the union has in theory has jurisdiction over everything to do with your employment. Yeah. So, and that could be, for example, say you've suffered a motor vehicle accident outside of work, but the outcome of maybe you've had an injury or something, maybe you've had an injury to your neck or an injury to your back. As a result of that injury, it's impacting on your ability to do your work. That's now become something the union can help you with, even though the origin of the injury is outside of work. Now that it's impacting on your work, it becomes part of the union's jurisdiction.
Okay, that's great to know. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you for addressing that. So it sounds like you have a lot of passionate causes. And I was wondering, what are your most passionate causes?
That's a great question. Let me narrow it down. So in my heart of hearts, I am a queer and feminist activist. And kind of, that's where the critique comes most naturally to me, because it's the intersection of my identities as well. And so I would say that one of my really big passions is advancing the rights of queer people and women. So I guess I should say advancing the rights of queer and non-cis men, the rights of queer people and non-cis men. Though I don't think that we should, I'm here for the rights of straight cis men. I'm here for it. It's just that they already have them. So
it's the people who need it the most that you're advocating for, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, and I take an equity lens. So, I'm, obviously an advocate for equality, but I think equity is a much more meaningful lens. So it's not just getting everybody to the same spot, but making sure that everybody has all the tools to get to that spot, and that we're all rising together. So that's definitely one of them, queer and women identified, the rights of queer and women identified people.
Yes.
And my other is, and I should say I have a particular focus on sexual violence, and with regards, one of my areas that I specialize in is assisting women identified and queer identified people who have experienced sexual violence, whether it's sexual assault or sexual harassment, predominantly in the workplace, because it tends to be the clients that I work with, but otherwise as well. So I think that it's just such a, it's still an issue, despite all of the work, and putting in quotes work. I mean, we've done a lot of work as societies, as societies, I should say, across the world. But there's still a lot more work to be done, and it still is very prevalent. It still is the fact that people suffer sexual violence, particularly sexual and gender minorities. So I have a focus on that, on doing that work. And the other area that I do a lot of work in is with people that are experiencing discrimination on the basis of race. So my clients do tend to be intersectional. So, it tends to be, that an individual is experiencing discrimination, for example, in the workplace on the basis of their race and their sexuality, race and their gender identity. And so that's another area where I specialize in, and I'm very, very passionate about is, I just, I'm white, I'm white identified. And it allows me to move through the world in ways that a lot of people don't. They don't have that ability. They don't have that right and that privilege. And it's so disturbing to me. And so I am one of the things I'm learning about, and I keep learning about, and I keep trying to always bring to my practice is, is critical race theory broadly, but is the focus of like, how do we use this avenue, or the avenues available to us, to deal with systemic racism, to deal with the institutional forms of racism that my client has experienced, on top of the direct racism that my client has experienced. So I try to take both a direct and a systemic lens. And I think that's so something I'm very passionate about. I think the more that kind of that idea of systemic or institutional racism, I think they're two different things, right? Like we're talking about institutions when we talk about institutional racism. When I think of systemic racism, I really think of
Indigenous groups.
Indigenous groups, of course. I mean, it's really the systems. We talk about a lot when we're talking about critical race theory, like, because systemic racism includes institutional racism, but it really talks about the way that it is systemic at every level, at every juncture of our social, political, and economic lives. It imbues every system. And so I try to be very conscious of that, given that I have never experienced it on the basis of my skin color, the basis of my race. So I keep trying to learn about it, and I'm always trying to be aware of it. And I try to think about how I bring that to my legal practice. And I will say, like, that's kind of the next, with regards to discrimination on the basis of race, when we're talking about human rights law, that is really one of the frontiers that we're fighting a lot about, because we can deal with direct discrimination really well. We can deal with, the law recognizes that calling somebody by a pejorative term related to their race is discrimination. We get it. We agree.
Yes.
Finally, we all agree.
Yes.
It's, at least from a legal perspective, that's a human rights violation. But when we're talking about, for example, I've worked in the past with clients who've experienced what I would describe as a race-based glass ceiling. where, in their workplace, where, all the white people are getting promoted, but none of the racialized people are getting promoted, or if they're getting promoted, it's not really like they're not getting the types of promotions and the wage raises that all of these kind of white folks are. And so that dealing with that issue is a bit more complicated for the law. We're still developing the language um, to really get the law to recognize that.
Yes.
Um, so to recognize the more, these less direct, these less, these situations where, um, every racialized person in the world can point it and say that's racism,
Yeah.
but really getting what is fundamentally a white system. Our system of laws is fundamentally a colonial white system. Getting that system of law to be able to also go, yeah, no, that's race. We get it. That's racism. We're still having that conversation with the law. So
Yeah.
I think I'm very passionate about doing that work and having, advancing that conversation with the law.
That's fantastic. We need more people like you to advocate for, people who don't have as much power and privilege, and like you said, has experienced the glass ceiling racism, which happens in the workplace all the time. And it can be with somebody who is ethnicity wise, um, non-white but still a Canadian, for instance, and it can be in various situations. It can also be that ethnicity wise that they're not white, and not only do they have systemic racism, but they also have sexism and sexual harassment cases based on race as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's never just one thing, right? Like, um, I mean, and that's where that's where the lens of intersectionality comes in. But I mean, none of us are moving through the world with just one identity, and the main identities, the ones that maybe people perceive, whether or not we hold those identities, but the ones that people perceive when they look at us that are based on our appearance, they're so full, they're so full of perceptions, and so full of stereotypes. And so, yeah, yeah, I know, yeah,
Really?
yeah, they're so
Yeah.
full. So, you look woman identified and you're Asian,
Mm.
and maybe you also look queer, whatever that means.
Yeah, I
Um,
know.
that's a really, yeah, that's a package identity. That's an identity that's
Oh,
definitely full of a
wow.
package of stereotypes. But like, you've got these three intersecting identities, and somebody looks at you and like, it's like an algorithm, right? Like all of these stereotypes kind of like click in, right? um,
Checkbox.
yeah, check that box, and like, you can see like a graph, like a mind map where it's like this box, okay, then this one and this one, right? So
Yes.
it's never just one thing, it's never just that you're being mistreated because you're a woman or you're female identified or because you're Asian. Like,
Mm.
there's a package of stereotypes, um, that gets applied to Asian men, and a package of stereotypes that get applied to Asian women and Asian non-binary people. And they're different, but the mechanism, we think about that. The cognitive mechanism is the same.
That's
Um, yeah, but it's never just one thing. It's always an intersection, right? And it's unique for every person, which I love about the work. I should say, oh, I love it when people get discriminated against. No, but
yeah.
like what I love about the work it is very unique, right? And so people come to me with this constellation of identities and factors, and it's so valuable for me to be able to sit with them and detangle them and say, I really think that you were experiencing, that colleague said that to you,
Mm.
not just because you're female identified, but um, also because you have a disability, or also because, and to kind of tie them up and not really tie them, separate them into their various streams, and then step back with the client and look at them all together. And we kind of say, here are the various ways that you've been mistreated, and it's never just one thing. It's
No,
always
it
connected
never
throughout.
is.
It never is. And it's often extremely valuable for the individual to go through that process, to have somebody kind of walk them. I mean, your own identities, but like to have somebody in a legal sense kind of go, it's this one and this one and this one and this one. And here's how they all tie together. And then we stand back together and we look at it and people go, oh my God.
Yes.
Like I knew it inside, but to have it put down into words like this is so valuable and so empowering. And that's one of the things that I really love about my work is when somebody shares with me, and I'm so grateful that people can be so vulnerable. People choose to be so vulnerable, and they give me this gift of being so vulnerable with me, and help let they let me into their lives so that I can help them kind of detangle these things. And once they let me get this really good understanding, and then I can turn around and put it on paper and like a human rights complaint or something. And I often have clients go, wow, like, I didn't know, I knew it was this bad, but like, I didn't know how to put it into words.
Yes, it's like
Um,
that guide that makes a lot of sense to be the person that puts the realization out there, right?
yeah. Yeah. So I find that that's like one of my favorite parts of my job is being able to like take, the experiences that people have had and turn them into kind
Mm.
of concrete things on paper, because I think that's really empowering because people go, wow, like it's not just, this wasn't just happening in my head. Like not only, has it been written down, but somebody else heard me
Mm.
and helped me turn it into words. And I think that like just that, and sometimes just that is so rewarding, is so powerful for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, I appreciate you. And it sounds like that's what really inspires you as a lawyer and the work that you do.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, you mentioned in one of our conversations that you were also passionate about mental health. Can you please elaborate more on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I'm very passionate about mental health, and from a kind of like, how does mental health impact, how is mental health protected as a disability under human rights law?
Mm.
How can it be protected in employment contexts and other complex throughout our society? But also just, this is more of a personal thing, but I'm very fascinated with the human brain and the human condition.
Mm.
And I'm interested also in, what do people experience as good mental hygiene?
I like
What
that
does
word.
it mean? Yeah, right? Like,
Mental
what does
hygiene.
it mean to live? Yeah, good mental hygiene. What does it mean to live with this like complicated brain, and these complicated feelings in this like very, very complicated world that seems to be getting more complicated every day? Um, it's very challenging. And so I've got that professional interest in assisting clients who
Mm.
have mental health challenges, or mental health struggles or mental health diagnoses, or just no challenges, no struggles, just part of their life. And, they got to navigate that in the workplace,
Absolutely.
or somewhere else, I should say. So I have that professional interest in it. And then I have a personal interest in it. And the personal interest stems from the fact that I have a diagnosed anxiety disorder.
Mm.
I've been diagnosed, I think, with a lot of people that have anxiety in particular, like with all the anxiety disorders under the sun. So you got your generalized anxiety disorder, you got your, little bit of the kind of like OCD and OCD diagnosis. And so I've had a number of anxiety diagnoses over the years,
Mm.
and my own experience navigating anxiety, as part of my life, and often as part of my daily life, um, has really, it's been very enriching for me.
Yeah.
Not enjoyable at all times, but very enriching. And so it's taught me a lot about, uh, it's taught me a lot about what it's like to struggle. Um, and I think that that's given me a huge amount of empathy, in my life. It's really allowed me to be able to um, look at other people and kind of go, like life can be so hard sometimes, and
Absolutely.
that we're all
I totally resonate with that. And
yeah,
thank you for
life is really
sharing that.
hard.
Everybody probably is thinking the same thing while watching this, is that we're all human, we're all imperfect, we all have struggles, and being empathetic is one of the most important characteristics in what we do during the journey of our lives, right?
It's so valuable, and I mean, I think it's also something that I don't know, it, I often feel that empathy is like the lack of empathy is the root cause of so many of the issues that we're dealing with. Um,
Yeah.
at a local, at a grassroots level, and at an international level. Um, it's just like we don't fundamentally. Some people, I don't know if it's. I do believe that it's because some people just don't ever get taught it at a young age. But fundamentally, people struggle with putting themselves in other people's shoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You're right.
and it's just such a tragedy. It's such a tragedy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so it's sometimes maybe challenging to be a lawyer when you're super empathetic.
I can
You
only
always see the
imagine.
other side.
Yeah.
It's hard to go after people when you're like being very empathetic. So I have chosen one of the most polarized areas to practice law. Um, so yeah, so I've my own journey with mental health has really given me a lot of empathy
Mhm.
into the human condition and how damn hard it is to be alive.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know?
You say that empathy is the approach you use with your clients who are facing mental health challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say, I mean, empathy is my approach to all of my clients.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it, I want my clients to feel like we're a team, which is not really the way that a lot of lawyers practice. And I don't say not all of them, but it's kind of a new way of approaching the law that
Yeah.
the client and the lawyer are a team, and not one of us is an expert. I'm not an expert. I should say not only one of us is an expert. We're both experts. We just have expertise in different areas, right? So my
Yeah.
client is the expertise in their life and what they want to do, what their decisions are, and I have an expertise in law. And I can help them understand what their options are,
Mm.
and help them understand some of the other options that may not be obviously available, but are still things that we can get through the law. So it's not always the case that we want to immediately sue somebody and start go to court and litigate. In
No.
fact, I would say that's like the last resort. We should do that if everything else fails. It could be the case that what everybody needs in this situation is a mediation. All the parties need to come together with a neutral third party, typically a lawyer who is also, who's skilled in facilitating conversations and negotiations. And if we get them all together, probably we can resolve it. And maybe that's what we need to do. So that's kind of how I approach my practices. My
Mm.
client is an expert in their life, in the options that are available, in the options that will work for them. It's my job to kind of guide them, give them the information they need from a legal perspective, and guide them through this process. And so that takes a lot of empathy. I mean, and I want my clients to feel empowered. I want them to feel like working with me was empowering,
Mm.
that I didn't just tell them all the things that they should do. I want them to feel like interacting with the legal system was empowering, which can be really difficult, especially if you're going after somebody else. If you're a claimant or a plaintiff or if
Mm.
you're the wronged party,
Yeah.
the law often is not, it can be a very difficult place to get justice. So as much as possible, I want to make the process empowering, even if the outcome is
Mm.
not what everybody hoped for. So, um, I want my clients to feel like they're working with a person, not just a legal robot who comes in and is just like, we need to sue this person, pay me $3,000. Like, um, So I take that approach to all of my clients. But one of the approaches that I've received some training in, and I'm still being trained in, is something we call a trauma-informed approach. And that's basically recognizing that,
Yeah.
we all have difficult lives, and people have experienced traumas that we don't even know about.
Mhm.
And so the way that a client may be interacting with you or reacting or holding themselves,
Yeah.
could be the result of a lot of stuff that you don't know about. So, as much as possible, you want to kind of make space for those uniquenesses, make space for, um, and be empathetic to the ways that trauma or just being alive is impacting. Being a human, is
Yeah.
impacting on how people are interacting with you and interacting with the law.
Mhm.
And I find that that's really important in dealing with clients that have, they're dealing with mental health, whether it's a mental health diagnosis or not, or a challenge or like what have you. Um, those people that are in the midst of a mental health crisis or having mental health challenges, maybe for the first time, that's a really traumatic experience. Having been there myself, I know how traumatic it is. And so I try to I try to make sure that I recognize that.
Mhm.
And I'm not a mental health professional, so I can't, I can't, and I don't want to hold myself out to be. So it's not my role to counsel my clients or, to be a therapist for my clients.
Right.
But I think it is fundamentally my responsibility to make sure that um, they feel respected and heard when we're interacting with one another. And that if they're saying to me, mental health played a role in this entire experience, that I listen to that and I take it seriously. And I do my due diligence and I look at the law and I look at the facts and, I really see what's going on here. And that if we engage in a process, I make sure I make sure they understand the process, and I make sure that process is amenable to where they're at and what their abilities are. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate your insight on this. So I was wondering, are there any upcoming projects planned for this year?
So I'm at a bit of a juncture because I'm currently transitioning jobs. I'm transitioning from a private role, so being a private lawyer, to I've now taken a job in house with
Yeah.
a public sector union. Yeah, so I'll be
Mhm.
moving from having private clients to just working for the union without any private clients. So that's a big change for me. I've never held a role like that. I've always been in private law. Um, and it's bittersweet because I'm so excited and I'm going to work with a great team, and I love, excuse me, I mean, I'm a real, like, I'm really gung ho for the union. I love, I think unions are fundamental in advancing, both um both stabilizing, what's the word I'm looking for, crystallizing and protecting the rights that we currently have and advancing rights.
Mhm.
I think unions are absolutely fundamental to that process, and we should be doing all that we can to protect them and expand them and unionize people and have unionization and organization drives. So I'm so excited to be going to work in a union because I think it's going to be amazing. I'm going to do really great work with really great people.
Mhm.
But I mean, the bitter part of it is that I do have to let go of my individual clients, as far as I know. So it may be that at some point in the future, um, the nature of my work with the union may change. So maybe it will go down to part time or what. I don't know. Could be, but the nature of my employment with the union may change such that I can start taking private clients on again.
Yes.
Um, or not, but my hope is to like eventually get myself into a position where I'm able to work with clients again, because
Mhm.
I love it. I think it's so valuable. It's so rewarding. It's um it's really the thing that I love the most about my job.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping for that. So what's coming up in the next year? I don't know. you know, I don't
Fantastic.
know, but good stuff, I think.
Yeah, you'll have to tell me more about it later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, outside of work, what are your favorite hobbies and activities? How do you unwind from, a work that you're super passionate about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm very athletic, so I do a lot of individual sports. So I do a lot of cycling, I do a lot of running. I'm like increasingly getting into swimming.
Mm.
Used to swim a lot when I was a kid, but I've been trying to work it back into my schedule. And I also rock climb, which I think is amazing and great. I love rock climbing. I'm relatively new to it, but I've like really been bitten. I love it. So I've been doing a lot of that. Um, and I'm also very crafty, so I make my own soaps, which is really fun.
Wow, you'll have to tell
Yeah.
me later on. I'll be getting soaps from you. Just
Oh
kidding.
yeah. It's every Christmas, everybody in my life is like, soap again, thank you.
No, it's like it's so nice. It's like having like a little treat. You don't have to go to Lush anymore because you have your
It's
own
true.
in-house Lush person.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, it's like not all that hard and it's very tactile. So I was really into chemistry when I was a kid, so it feels like chemistry. It's really good. But I mean, it's also like it's hard when you're so busy and I just want to touch back on that. You brought up, what do you do to unwind when you're so passionate about the work? um I think sometimes people get really, it's hard to want to stop when you're so,
I can
you
relate.
believe so much in what, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's hard to want to stop. You want to do it all the time. And that's like, it's great to have so much motivation, but like
Yeah,
it's exhausting. And if you don't take the rest you need, you're going to burn out. And I've been burnt out. And the thing I always tell myself is like, if you get too tired, you can't do the work.
absolutely. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great advice. So, with the way of the world today, how can we bring in social justice, cultural diversity, and openness to society, especially during these times?
Mm. That's, yeah, I don't know if tell me if you find out. Um, I think about that a lot. I think about it a lot. What do we do? What do we do? Every time I read the news, what do we do?
Mm.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I gotta come back to empathy. Like, I really do think that we have a crisis of empathy in our lives, in our societies. Like we just, I mean, I get it. It's very hard to be empathetic when you're also, so stressed and so run down and you're so scared. I mean, the first thing that goes out the window when you get scared is empathy.
Yeah, totally
Yeah,
get it. Yeah.
yeah, you just get into these protection modes. And so, maybe because I have such a radical empathetic approach, like I I get it. I get why people are so hateful. Um, I get it, because they're so scared. Um, they're scared, they're insecure, they think that they're losing things. There's a great, yeah, I mean, this quote didn't come from me, but I did believe this before I saw the quote, and I don't know where the quote, who I saw this quote
Maybe
from.
they got it from you.
Maybe, yeah. But I mean, if you have experienced the pinnacle of power in a societal structure, if your position at the top level of the pyramid, um, has enabled you to oppress others, um, and then and as society changes, you lose that right. You lose, I shouldn't say the right, but you lose the ability to oppress others with impunity. That feels like oppression.
Yeah.
That feels like oppression to you, because you're like, I used to be able to run my life this way and now I can't. I'm being silenced, I'm being censured. I don't know, women are too out there, the traditional family. I'm like, man.
I love it.
um it feels like you're losing something, right? Like you'll have to change your behavior, because it's no longer palatable, it's no longer acceptable to behave in that way. And that feels like oppression.
Yes.
It's not oppression. It's not. It's just, it's just equality.
Yeah.
But I understand that it can feel like oppression, and if nobody has really done that work with you to explain to you, to give you, first of all, the tools to empathize with somebody, to really hold up your experience against somebody else's experience and say, oh yeah, like I had way more privileges and rights than them, and like the fact that like now they can walk on the street without being called a racial, a terribly derogatory term,
Yeah.
that's actually a step towards putting us at the same position rather than me losing a right.
Yeah. Right.
And if nobody's done that, I think empathy work with people, particularly when they're kids,
Tell me about it.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to do that from a society. I mean, and that's like effectively what a lot of people are trying to use Twitter, trying to use Facebook to do, which is the worst medium ever. Like you just
can be, yes, 100% can be.
It can be, yeah, you're right. Not always, but it certainly can be. But like that's like it's so frustrating because you effectively you're telling people like have empathy, put yourself in other people's shoes, like imagine what it was like, when you were allowed to oppress people, imagine what that felt like. And to have people be like, oh, I don't know, that's, I'm being oppressed, yes, but, here's all the other things that oppressed group got to experience, like, and therefore we were always on equal footing, what have you. That's just like, those are two different conversations, and it's exhausting. Like and people get mad and people get frustrated. How could you not? And then it just devolves. So yeah, I mean, what can we do? Have kids and teach them better.
Reset. Hit the reset button.
Reset. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard because it's just you can't do that kind. It's a very personable work. It's very it's work that's exhausting for the person doing the work and for the person guiding them through it. And so I don't know how to do it, on a grand scale. I don't know how to do it on a broad scale. I'm going to have kids and teach them.
Yeah. I think you're doing some of it, even in your work, a lot of it actually. So yeah, thank you so much for, sharing. And thank you, Jay, for being such a great candidate and, your pearls of wisdom.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wait, I have one thing to add. I do have a concrete thing. Sure. Give teachers more money.
Yes.
Yeah. Like fund.
Give your educators more money because they're the ones who are watching your kids from, what is it, 8:30 to 4:30?
Yeah. Fund public education way more than it's being funded, because like if that's also where people do that work. That's where kids learn empathy, Fund public education.
Yes.
Sorry, I jumped in there.
It's all good. Thank you for sharing that. And, your experiences, they're quite a journey. You have such an art to your story, and I really appreciate you. So thank you for being vulnerable, and thank you for being you. And for those of you watching, thank you for tuning in. Without you, this show would not exist. So please don't forget to leave comments, click the like button, subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell for future episodes. In the meantime, please be well, practice self-care, and follow safe social protocols. See you next time. Bye.